This is Can You Believe It? A platform where we believe whole truth is God's truth, whether the truth is found in social sciences, mathematics, physics, or chemistry. Doesn't matter. All truth is God's truth. And that's our promise. And our responsibility as scholars is to find it wherever it may be found, analyze that truth, and share it with all creatures, big and small, on God's green earth. Last week, we argued that racism is an old and ugly form of oppression that seeks to use others for selfish interest. Racism denies the other human beings who are created equally, according to the American Constitution and statement from that important document. Believe that we are all created equally and have equal opportunities to experience and to live joyfully and experience life in abundance. Racism and, in the case of Africa, tribalism and nepotism makes an assumption that one group is better than the other. But we argued that when it comes to racism, we argue that no matter how you slice it, it's still the same old baloney. We are all created in the image of God. And so the question we have been trying to answer is this: how did we get here? How do you get to a point whereby we do not get along? We look at the propaganda raised by a professor by the name of Richard Popkins, a propaganda that classified humans who look different for whatever reason, humans who might have come from origins or from society or socially unacceptable classes, that is, those who were usually poor and those who had less in terms of material stuff, those who did not have a lot of net disposable income, families who possessed little to no political power, families who were different in skin tone and had connections to the Indian communities in the Americas, the South Americas, the Gypsies, and the Africans. Those types of people with such origins were classified as the Pre-Adamites or the Degenerates. The Pre-Adamites were created, according to Hopkins, prior to Adam and Eve. Go figure that out. And then we have the degenerates, who are the people who are the descendants of Adam and Eve, but something happened that they just didn't develop into full humans. Well, when we consider the Native Americans, for instance, they were seen as incapable of making moral and ethical decisions. They were seen as incapable of managing their large chunks of land, and therefore, someone had to come in and take that land by force and manage it for them. Take it by whatever means possible. The pre Adamite people and the degenerate theories of Richard Hopkins centered on the question of whether the origins of the Native Americans were traceable to the migrations of biblical people. And of course, Hopkins concluded, or he argued, that some of the tribes from biblical times had somehow become degenerate or subhuman for that matter. Basically, the argument boiled down to the Native Americans who are not descendants from the biblical world at all, or biblical world as we know it. Hopkins and his contemporaries argued that the Native Americans had a separate origin from Adam and Eve, and therefore they were pre-Adamites. What do you know? Greed will take or make a brother enslave his own sister. Well, according to Richard Hopkins, writing in the 1700s, this is no long ago, by the way, the American Indians were not descendants of Adam and Eve. And because of that, they must have had a different origin, an earlier origin than Adam and Eve, a different origin from that of Adam and Eve as we know it. First of all, this is a form of, this is a bunch of baloney, because we know very well that this contradicts biblical history as we know it. I don't know even if someone can argue the existence of human life before the beginning of creation. But that goes Mr. Hopkins with his education. Hopkins argued that the pre-Adamites existed before Adam and Eve, and among these pre-Adamites were the Red Indians and others. If you follow this trend of thinking, you can see where the Africans and the Indians of India and the poor Mexicans will end up on the ladder. Hopkins wanted so bad to argue that the Indians were subhuman and therefore they deserved less stuff and needed to be treated as subhuman people, and as such, they could not manage their land. And also, they were incapable or unable to make moral and ethical decisions by themselves. Somebody needed to think for them, think on their behalf. This is history rooting from the 1700s, my friends. We can therefore argue that Hopkins' anthropological conclusions justify the action of the inquisitionists of taking the land of the native people without any compensation. And the argument also saw to it that some of the people who led a rebellion or resisted to surrender, these kinds of people were eliminated through whatever means possible. They were subhuman anyway. So this conclusion of referring people created in the Imago Dei as subhuman made it possible for the inquisitionists to do whatever they wanted to do to the people who they encountered, because they were considered again to be less human in stature and in material value, for that matter. The Spanish Inquisitionists justified their mistreatment of the Native Americans by claiming they were subhuman and incapable of having abstract ideas and of running their own world. The Native Americans were deemed incapable of morality and unable to become Christians, for that matter. This also is an argument that was used by the early Portuguese explorers and the Spanish explorers to the African continent. I'm yet to address the issues of the invasion of, or rather the colonization of the African continent. That will be an interesting one. I can't wait to get to that. But the Pre-Adamites and the Degenerate views were also advanced by other Spanish theorists such as Sepúlveda and Oviedo, who existed in the 16th century. Now we start to get some names here. A little bit farther back in the 1500s, in actually the 1512, a preacher by the name of Montesinos, residing in Santo Domingo, opposed this mistreatment of the Indians and insisted that they be treated as humans. Here comes a Christian advocate, a Catholic priest for that matter, with some conscience. Another clergy by the name of Bartolomé de las Casas. Bartolomé de las Casas. Oh my goodness, I gotta learn some Spanish here. Bartolomé de las Casas, who was the bishop of Caipas, debated Sepúlveda and his fellow Spanish theorists and his fellow followers for over 50 years over this false science and assumption of the Pre-Adamites and the Degenerates. And Bartolomé de las Casas argued that there is no way we can argue for Pre-Adamite people and people who can be classified as degenerates. I'll be siding with Bartolomé de las Casas at any moment. But Bishop Bartolomé de las Casas argued that all created people in the world were human. This is in the 1500s. He argued that all people have the ability to understand and have violation, or volition for that matter. All people have the ability to take satisfaction in goodness and to feel pleasure and be happy and enjoy delicious things, right? He argued that all people can experience regret and have the ability to recognize evil when they see it and can call it when they see it. And even better, they can avoid it when they know it's visible, when they see it's coming their way. So this argument was contrary to that of Sepúlveda, Oviedo, and Richard Hopkins for sure. But will the teachings of the bishop Bartolomé de las Casas take root and preserve the history of the American Indians, or will it just kind of fade out? Will this historical argument be able to save the land of the Indians from the greedy inquisitionists and their gunpowder? Well, will it convince the Spanish inquisitionists, who are greedy and determined to take the land of the Indians for free and to get free labor, free women, and free stuff? Will it? By the end, or by the time, or this particular time, a professor of philosophy who could be considered as the first professor in the New World, by the name of Alonso de Rivera Cruz. Alonso de Rivera Cruz argued in his first and only course at the University of Mexico in the 1500s that the Spaniards did not have the right to subjugate the Indians. And hear this. The church did not remain silent at this time, for Pope Paul III in 1537, Pope Paul III of the Catholic Church in 1537 declared that, and I quote, the Indians are truly men, and they were not only capable of understanding the Catholic faith, but according to the tour information, they desired to exceedingly receive it with all of their hearts. Here comes the voice of reason in the midst of chaos. The Catholic Church spoke against this mistreatment of the Indians in 1537. That was before there was a Reformation movement by Martin Luther in Germany. However, as much as the church tried, as much as the Catholic Church intervened in the situation, the church could not stop the conquest of the Americas and the mistreatment of Native American people. The money was too much and too sweet to stop the movement. Evil was overtaking human reason. Mercy and love and compassion were thrown out the window. Even though later the Spanish government and the church, that is the Roman Catholic Church, eventually declared that the Indians were fully human. Alonso de la Vera Cruz, this bold professor who stood to defend the Red Indians, a man who advocated for the Red Indians, was later removed, or should we say fired, from as a professor at the University of Mexico, and he was sent to the lower Yucatan region, where he ended up, kind of, what happens. This, as this inhuman conquest of Americas continued, racial theories, almost backed up by fake science, remained crucial in justifying the treatment of the local people, and later the enslavement of Africans who often were needed to replace the rapidly dying indigenous Red Indians in the Americas and in the New World. Here we see the need for more labor from the African continent. I'm going to address that later. So pay attention to that. Subscribe to the channel for more details here. So the Spanish debate of pre-Adamites and degenerates was simply a preview of the things to come for the inquisitionists who now rethink their plan and begin the new desire to conquer Africa. The two theories used to explain human differences again were the pre-Adamite and the degenerate theories that were crafted by the Spanish inquisitionists and proposed by the Spanish in the 16th century. These theories were later adopted mainly by the English, Anglo-Americans, and the French in the 17th century and the 18th century as they conquered the African continent. The lie began to spread, and as we see that it is deeply covered by science and anthropology and education, including scholars based out of top-notch schools like Harvard and Oxford and Yale. Top-notch schools will become the supporting agents of the pre-Adamite theory and the degenerates. And I'm going to name a couple names here, which you'll probably be able to kind of connect with this crazy and evil history of the human life. The pre-Adamite and degenerate theories provided the basis for a new trend that favored racism and the development of racist thought regarding all people of color And we see this spewing later to affect the Jewish people in the 19th and the 20th centuries combined. Even after Charles Darwin, with his theory of evolution and the selection of species, which was again rooted in Pre-Adamite and the Degenerate theories, we see a survival of this school of thought that we'll call evil today. So rather than challenging the biblical account of human origins, the degenerate theory, on the other hand, made the assumption that all humans were created by God, beginning with Adam and Eve. But listen to this. But those who were non-whites were thought to be inferior and in need of guidance and control, which was to be provided by the more rational people who were the male whites of European descent, and white Christian men who were considered to be moral and ethical more than the degenerate people. So the condition of the degenerates was considered to be caused by some degenerative gene or a degenerative process that was related to, listen to this, related to climate or the area of origin, and caused by conditions of life which were caused by also isolation from Christian civilization and from the New World. This degenerate condition was also caused by some kind of a divine action explained in the Bible, so they say. Thus, the remedy was to give the degenerate people the benefit of the European or Western education and an overdose of Western culture, and missionizing them or proselytizing them to Christianity. Oh, come, Lord Jesus. Lordy, Lordy, Lordy. This is some crazy stuff going on here in the 15th through the 18th century. May I say the 19th century? Now, you know why some of the missionaries came to Africa and treated your parents or great-great-parents like they did. They saw the Africans, the natives, as degenerates and lesser than, and therefore the mindset of understanding African theology and African forms of worship, African culture, was kind of just thrown through the window. I can't wait to share with you how the philosophers of the 17th century and the 18th century influenced this trend of racism. We are talking of philosophers like John Locke, Immanuel Kant, and others, who I'm going to name here. So don't fail to subscribe to the channel for more juicy stuff from our past. We have to be good students of history in order to learn how to avoid the mistakes of yesterday. Let's continue from here next week. This has been Can You Believe It? We believe that all truth is God's truth, whether that truth is found in the social sciences, in mathematics, in physics, or in chemistry, or even biology. Our premise is founded on the basis that all truth is God's truth, and our responsibility is to find that truth wherever it may be found, analyze it, and share it with all creatures, big and small, on God's green earth. Looking forward to hearing from you and talking to you next time. Thank you.